Hello, my name is Emdawg Luv, and I would like to welcome you to my channel and to my first podcast. The title of my first episode is called My Beginning. The point of this episode is to tell you guys a little bit about myself and how I have dealt with being in and coming out of the hospital. Now, for some of you out there, you might already know a little bit about me and my story. But for some of you out there who don't know, I came into this world with health conditions that my parents and the doctors, they weren't even aware of. So that was when a lot of my medical adventures first started. When I was 4 years old, I was given the first of many diagnoses. And this diagnosis in particular was very rare back when I was 4 years old. The name of this diagnosis is Sotos syndrome. And I didn't actually find out about my Sotos syndrome until I went to my very first conference, where my parents were sat down at a meeting to get more information on Sotos syndrome. When I was 4 years old. Sotos syndrome is a disorder that can be accompanied by autism and can also come along with developmental delays. Now, people don't normally think as other people with Sotos syndrome as really intelligent. But people with Sotos syndrome, they just have a completely different way of thinking, really. Now, I don't really know where my Sotos genetically came from, because my mom told me that none of my relatives even had Sotos syndrome. So, I guess in a way, I'm a rare case in my family. Now, you may not know this, but people with Sotos syndrome can also be shy, and they can be very socially awkward, meaning that they sometimes don't have the skills to be social. However, some people with Sotos can also tend to be very social. Some similarities I have with others who have Sotos syndrome are we tend to be very clumsy. And unfortunately, we can also have unusual aggression. And this may lead to having irritability also. However, there are more to people who have Sotos syndrome than just their syndrome. Like me, there are lots of activities and hobbies that I enjoy doing. For example, one of my all-time favorite things to do is sing. Singing is actually how I learned to talk. That and sign language. In fact, I started signing around the age of 2. And I started singing around the time that I went to my first Sotos conference. My singing is actually what brings out my personality. So when I sing a happy and silly song, it brings out my funny side, my silly side. When I sing a really kind of sad song and a kind of emotional song, it brings out my emotional side too. One of the songs that I sang without any vocal lessons was a whole new world from Aladdin the movie. This was when I was 5 years old. Of course, there are many other things about me that make up who I am as a person, not just Sotos syndrome. Definitely not signing or singing either. I also grew up being a huge fan of Disney. In fact, my favorite princesses are Cinderella, Ariel the Little Mermaid, Pocahontas, and Snow White. My favorite Avengers superhero would have to be Thor. And my favorite Disney prince would have to be Aladdin. There are many other things I'm interested in too. I am also a huge Michael Jackson fan, which actually means I'm also a huge 80s fan. So you're probably thinking, oh, so you must be a fan of Cyndi Lauper, Aerosmith, Journey, and Phil Collins, right? Well, guess what? You are correct. My mom grew up listening to all of those artists. So when she had me and I grew up in my teen years, I actually started listening to those artists myself, not just Michael Jackson. I'm going to go back to when I was in the hospital a lot. I have spent my whole life going in and coming out of the hospital. Honestly. The reason for that is because not only did I get diagnosed with Sotos syndrome in the hospital, but in June of the year 2009, I got very sick. And my small intestine got bluish green bile in it, which meant at the time my native small intestine, was dead. In fact, I was in an intensive care unit for 119 days straight. And the doctors told my mom that I was not going to make it. Now, since that happened, that had meant I had needed a transplant. And without a transplant, I would have probably died, honestly. Now, what is a transplant? A transplant is a surgery where the surgeon takes an already used organ which has compatible DNA, so the person getting the transplant and their body will not reject the organ. The surgeon puts the organ in the person getting the transplant. And that person in this podcast, back then, that was me. When I was put on the list for the day I received my transplant, I had to wait 6 months up to a year before actually getting the transplant. The reason I had to wait is because the doctors, in order to be a good candidate and to have good matching DNA, the doctors had to search really hard for the right person who is also looking to donate their small intestine and had the exact match for my DNA. Now, getting on the list and getting a transplant in general is not all fun and games at first. Oh, no. The reason I say that is because when I thought, oh, hey, I was getting my transplant, I was getting the call to officially be put on the list for my transplant. But 5 minutes later, after the original call, the person who called us said, "Oh, our apologies. We don't have a donor for her." Oh man, when I heard the caller say that, I was so devastated. We had to turn around from where we were and go back home. So it was a very sad time because I had been waiting a very long time to get my transplant. Now, here's the happy part. When it finally came time for me to actually get my transplant, it was 8 days after my birthday. So it was in a way, it was a life-changing birthday present. It was a life-saving birthday present, actually. The date was July 28th, because my birthday is July 20th. It was July 28th, 2011. I woke up feeling very groggy, but that's only because of the anesthesia the doctors had to give me during the surgery so I wouldn't wake up. But once I did wake up, I said very groggily to my mom, "Where's my phone?" Which is what every teenager I imagine out there would say, especially if they had a cell phone. Well, thank you for joining me on my journey, and this will not be my last podcast. I hope to see you down the road, and you can look me up on Instagram. My name is #EmsExperience. All right. Thank you.